Rattling through the gathering dusk after his day's toil in the seething metropolis, the troglodytic commuter of today is seldom aware of, far less concerned with, the unique cultural heritage of the suburb he has made his home, and, very often, his life is the poorer for it. In a few moments, this train will rumble to a standstill in a place that, over 300 years ago, was described in these words.
Towards the time of harvest, a man may behold the fields round about so sweetly to address themselves to the sickle and scythe with such comfortable abundance of all kinds of grain, that it maketh the inhabitants to clap their hands for joy to see their valleys sown, to laugh and sing. Yet this fruitful and pleasant country yieldeth little comfort unto the wayfaring man in the winter season, by reason of the clayish nature of the soil, which, after it hath tasted the autumn showers, it beginneth to mix deep and dirty, yielding unsavoury passage to horse and man. Yet the country swain holdeth it a sweet and pleasant garden, and can make himself melody, and dance knee-deep in dirt the whole day.
With disarming simplicity, with questionable accuracy, and with small pretence of grandiloquence, thus the early 17th century cartographer John Norton described the Vale of Harrow. As the Harrow of today continued its decline into suburban anonymity, to the bustling throng in its main shopping centre, the Harrow of 3 centuries ago seems too remote to bother with. Yet it was in the broad and verdant acres dominated by Harrow's lofty hill that the 17th century saw the beginnings of what was to develop into a unique heritage, the echoes of which, so long as men and women have the will to hear them, are destined to ring into eternity. For it was in the countryside, a few miles from Harrow Hill, that, as a young man and many years before blindness closed in upon him, the poet John Milton found visual inspiration for his verse. Not far from Stanmore, at Cannons Park, stands the North London Collegiate School for Girls. Even today, the building looks much the same as it did 200 years ago, as this old print shows. The site of the present modest building was previously occupied by a grandiose structure that had been erected with pompous showmanship by the then Duke of Chandos. The palatial dwelling bore the name Cannons, and it was here in the year 1718 that a sturdy, thick-set man arrived to take up the position of music master. His name, already widely known in the world of music, was George Frederick Handel. Although Handel's association with Cannons and with nearby St. Lawrence Church was relatively brief, his subsequent international fame evoked a romantic tale involving a local blacksmith. Whilst sheltering from the rain in the Edgware workshop of William Powell, the composer found himself fascinated by the melodious ringing of the anvil. The musical genius of the great man was so captivated by the resonant sound that an air he subsequently based upon it was known, as it is to this day, as the Harmonious Blacksmith. Alas, the pleasant tale of Handel and the village blacksmith is no more than mischievous invention. William Powell, the blacksmith, was certainly a man of flesh and blood, but the likelihood that he and Handel even set eyes on each other is remote. But, however caused, legends die hard, and a stone memorial to William Powell, the harmonious blacksmith, is still to be found tucked away among the gravestones in St. Churchyard. Scandal died in 1759. 3 years later, in 1762, an 11-year-old boy climbed the steep slope of Harrow Hill to enter the famous school as a pupil. He was Master Richard Sheridan. For 6 long years, Sheridan, unhappy and short of money, remained at Harrow School. His meteoric career as a dramatist, it lasted little more than 5 years, started when he was 23 years of age with The Rivals. In 1780, having relinquished his dramatic vocation in favour of politics, he returned to Harrow Hill, where he and his beautiful wife Elizabeth took up residence at the Grove near the church. In such apparently affluent surroundings, who could have foretold that Sheridan, at one time the leading dramatist of his age, was destined to die in poverty? Yet, as Sheridan's world began to crumble about him, the tall spire of the church on Harrow Hill was already looking down upon another gifted pupil at the school, a slender, crippled youth soon to become one of the giants of English literature, George Gordon, Lord Byron. Whether it was the commanding view from the churchyard, or Byron's predilection to fits of morbid melancholy that repeatedly lured him to while away the hours here, we may never know. But certain it is that his moods of despondency were spaced well enough apart to permit time for his wholehearted fraternization with local townspeople. Some of Byron's best-loved poems contain references to his boyhood at Harrow.
Again I behold where for hours I have pondered, as reclining at eve on yon tombstone I lay. Or round the steep brow of the churchyard I wandered, to catch the last gleam of the sun's setting ray.
A year or two before the scandal of his private life drove Byron from England, there occurred an event now commemorated by a tablet on the wall at Harrow School. Within yards of this spot, a 13-year-old Harrow schoolboy, Anthony Ashley Cooper, witnessed a spectacle that was to change the whole course of his life.
Get in there, where's the doobie pop? There's a pig on there. Get on, Joey. Yeah.
The nauseating sight of a pauper's mortal remains being borne to the grave with such indignities resolved young Ashley Cooper to devote the remainder of his life to the welfare of the poor and the oppressed. How well he did this is recorded in the annals of dozens of philanthropic societies. Yet, in the years to come, a seemingly malevolent twist of fate was to bring personal tragedy to the gentle benefactor. His own son was to die at Harrow School when only 16 years of age. To this day, Roxeth School stands as a permanent reminder of that cruel loss. At the age of 50, Ashley Cooper succeeded to the title Earl of Shaftesbury, and, to most of us, it is perhaps by this name that his life's work is best remembered. The Shaftesbury homes and Arethusa training ship are renowned throughout the land. Anthony Trollope, the novelist, was born in 1815 and, like Ashley Cooper, became a pupil at Harrow School. But young Trollope, ragged and unkempt, was a home-boarding charity scholar, and his twice-daily 3-mile trudge from the humble family home on Harrow Weald served not only to render his poor garments even more threadbare, it embittered his mind as well. Contemporary documents enable us to gain some idea of the daily physical hardship endured by 11-year-old Anthony, and on maps of the period, the location of his home on the Weald and the route of his arduous journey can be plotted with reasonable certainty. But of the effects of the derision and scorn showered upon him by the more affluent scholars at Harrow, we can only largely surmise. 40 years later, in 1867, when Trollope's reputation as a novelist was well established, the shadow of yet another literary giant moved over the high hill, Matthew Arnold, the poet. Today, 100 years later, the building in which he lived, Byron House, which he described in most glowing terms, has undergone little external change. The modest name-board over this doorway reminds the passer-by of a further erstwhile, though temporary resident, the novelist Charles Kingsley. To the west of the hill, though still within the Vale of Harrow, lies Pinner, and it was here, in 1831, that, at the age of 28, the Victorian novelist Edward Bulwer Lytton, later Lord Lytton, wrote Eugène Aram. Of nearly 30 three-volume novels, perhaps his best known is The Last Days of Pompeii. Whilst at Pinner, Lytton's marriage was already showing signs of instability, and 5 years later it finally disintegrated. Though perhaps not a truly great writer, compared with the styles of today, his work is encumbered with ostentatious ornament. His perception of Victorian taste was uncannily accurate. Despite the century or so that has elapsed since Lytton's time, the energy of local residents has ensured that Pinner High Street today remains essentially the same as it did in Lytton's day. This striking monument, with its curious legend, in the churchyard at Pinner, reminds us in passing of another Victorian author, John Loudon. The vault beneath the structure contains the mortal remains of Loudon's father. Henry Pye, an 18th century poet, also lived in Pinner, and despite the prosaic and insipid qualities of his verse, was English Poet Laureate for many years. (1836), the year in which Lytton's marriage collapsed, saw the birth of W.S. Gilbert. Sir William Gilbert, as he later became, earned worldwide acclaim as the librettist for the Gilbert and Sullivan comic operas, and it was here at Grimsdyke that he ultimately came to live and, in tragic circumstances, to forfeit his life. To lovers of the peculiarly English Savoy operas, Grimsdyke today is a place of pilgrimage, and, cradled in Sullivan's music, Gilbert's words seem to haunt the quiet gardens. Green fields, secluded byways, quiet gardens, welcoming buildings of wood or mellowed brick and tile, the fragile medium of the printed word. In these things, Harrow's unique heritage lies precariously enshrined. But only in the hearts and minds of those who cherish this inheritance can it find lasting preservation. Already, a thick blanket of concrete encrusts much of the vale in which Harrow's heritage is rooted, and faceless towering walls that will not mellow with the passing years block out the light and compress the summer breeze into a blusterous gale. For those of us who live in Harrow Vale, this is a period of reckoning, for the priceless heritage of centuries is as frail as gossamer, and its thoughtless dissipation would not only involve the betrayal of a noble trust, it would result in the impoverishment of our lives and the lives of those to follow. If a Milton were to walk again in Harrow Vale, and who can say this will not be so, would his genius be nourished by the roots so long established here? Or would it, like so much of the Vale itself, be smothered into oblivion? The choice is ours.